Okay, so the weird thing is, isn't it, we're all sitting here tonight listening to these two, and yet we have no say in who's going to get in, which is obviously one of those things which we'll deal with. But I thought it'd be interesting, and I'm not going to ask you who you want in. I was going to ask you for a raise of hands if you've made up your mind before tonight who you wanted as the next Chief Minister, if either of these two were. And then at the end, I'm going to ask if anyone's changed their mind. So do you have a show of hands if you think you know yourself who you want as the next Chief Minister, without naming names, just your hand raise. So there's a few.
About a third. Yeah,
so there's a few doubters. Maybe we can get that near the end. So anyway, we're ready, are we? It's questions, and I really hope we've got lots and lots. We've got at least an hour, hopefully. So this is your moment to ask away. I could fill in and do loads as well, but this is your moment. So the microphone will come over to you. The hands are raised, and just wait until the microphone's in front of you, and then we ask away.
I hope the range of this microphone will extend all round the room. Sometimes it doesn't, unfortunately. But here we are, first question.
The big build-up, here we go.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Would either or both of you consider any political measures to try and curb the spiralling property prices on the island, which are doing so much damage to the hopes and aspirations of our younger generation?
And that's, I mean, everyone's asking that question, and I'd love to know the answer. So if there is one.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Do you want me to stay seated?
The microphone's
First of all, we absolutely recognise that there is a housing crisis at the moment on our island. I think the first thing that government needs to do to address this is pull housing out from its current sheltered existence in the Department for Infrastructure and bring it out into the open. I've suggested and view this as the need to appoint a housing minister or similar to immediately take control of this situation and to work as quickly as possible to deliver the policies to resolve this crisis that we are in. I see that it's likely to be a multitude of policies that are needed, both around identifying how we can more quickly address the housing need on the island, what housing stock we have or new housing we have planned, what brownfield sites are potentially available for us to develop that housing on, what zoned land is available with plans coming up that may be speeded up. But also we need to understand a little bit more about what is actually happening on our island, because a lot of the evidence that we have at the moment is anecdotal. Yes, the build-up of some wealth because of the lockdown periods have enabled people to save more money. That's certainly one element that appears to be driving it. There appears to be quite a lot of emotion involved at the moment about property purchasing and putting money into property for future investment purposes. But also there's evidence, anecdotally at least, that investment firms and investment groups are coming together to buy large swathes of property on our island. You know, if that is the case, if the evidence is there to support that, and we do need that evidence because at the moment we can't necessarily, haven't been able to pull that out, but if that is there, then I think yes, we do need to bring legislative measures in that may need to control who is actually buying property on this island, and then we also need to think about what sort of structures in terms of first-time buyers and affordable housing also need to be put in place.
Okay. So when you're talking about housing crisis, there's many different aspects of that. I think one of the first things to think about is homelessness. So on the Isle of Man, we don't have a statutory responsibility to house homeless people. We did that during the pandemic. We actually invested in finding those homeless people, but through liaison with GRI, and actually providing them with temporary accommodation for a while. And then they were given the support that they needed, hopefully to find access to supported housing afterwards. And that actually really made a difference to that small number of people on the island who are homeless. But there's a far larger number, particularly young people, whether they be called sofa surfers or they're just going from one place to another, who need housing. We also know that homeless people, they're disproportionately victims of domestic abuse. So we know that there's been a rise in domestic abuse. We know that people have had to leave their family homes due to it. We should be making a deliberate attempt to house them. So in terms of legislation, I think that's the first thing to deal with the crux of the problem. In terms of affordable housing, I think we need to break with the preconception that everyone wants to buy their own home, or everyone could at some point. We need to make sure that the rental sector is also affordable, accessible, and of a good quality. Now, the Landlord Registration Act that was passed is the first step towards trying to do that, but actually needs to be expanded more in terms of minimum standards, protections both for landlords and tenants through tenancy agreements, and a deposit guarantee scheme. And also we need to make sure that those same standards that are asked of private landlords are asked of public landlords. Because we know that in certain areas, the public realm, social housing, is substandard and needs significant investment. At the end of the day, with affordable housing, we need to build more homes, or we need to free up more homes to occupancy. So one of the things with the last census was exactly how many empty homes are there out there. We don't know. You can do census and people might be away. Manx Utilities have tried to look at electricity usage, but we're not quite sure. But going door to door, there are some very large empty houses lying there, which in modern day designs, you probably put 2 or 3 houses on the same plot. So why can't we harness some of that? I think we need to work very closely with local authorities to make sure that they can build social housing, to make sure that the tenancies actually free up that social housing when people are ready to move on, but also to break some of the logjams whereby people who are renting are paying so much in rent they can't save for a deposit. They are trapped in rental accommodation. And you can do that by many ways, but one of the DOI recommendations was to have a mid-rent scheme so that people could go into a house or a flat. They'd be charged 2/3 of the market rate and would be given the ability to save for a mortgage. With the Manx Development Corporation, which was established, there's a huge potential there using private initiative but a public-private partnership to do things like rent-to-buy schemes that don't exist at the moment, to actually create the right circumstances whereby we can have subsidised housing for key workers who can then come over to this island, put some roots down and then move on to the next step. As Alpha said, there are anecdotal stories of people from across buying large numbers of houses and therefore skewing the housing market. If that's correct, we need to act on that in the way that other jurisdictions have had to do so, particularly Canada and New Zealand, where they've brought in taxes for those people who are trying to buy. But we also need to deal with those people who live on the island, who for all the right will in the world are buying to let because that's their pension plan. We shouldn't necessarily penalise them, but we need to get that balance right. And I would like to see some efforts from the developers to ensure that new houses that are built are actually for owner occupation. New houses are homes, not an investment for other people.
Okay.
So that'll be it.
And you happy with that? Do you want to go back for another? Always feel free to go back for another go if you want to. When the microphone comes to you, are you happy with that? You're happy? Well, I just want to chirp in a bit. A minister for housing, did you say? Is that going to be a new minister, a new position, another?
Well, I think a government needs to set out its intentions early. This is a crisis, and people need the confidence that it is being tackled, and they also need accountability around who is actually tackling that crisis. And I think whether it's the chairman or whether it's a minister or whether it is a chairman, this absolutely, my commitment is to pull this out of the DOI as soon as possible, because at the moment, our policies and strategies around housing, I'm sorry, are just not good enough. We need more public transparency about this, and you're going to need to know what steps we're actively taking to deliver and resolve this crisis. And as I said, there's quite a holistic approach. It does cover many areas, but we also need action. And I talked about my open remarks about a government that is intent on delivery, and that's why, Paul, I firmly believe that actually pulling this out, giving somebody the responsibility to get on and deliver is a major step forward.
You'd have a minister or not?
No, in my document, I talk about having deputy ministers, rather than swelling Coleman or messing around with the ministerial arrangements we've got at the moment. Because we need to hit the ground running. We need to do things relatively quickly. And one of my worries is if we spend too much time as a government nasal gazing and rearranging everything, different departments go and different responsibilities go elsewhere, we won't get the outcomes we need. So we've got 11 new members. People with ministerial experience are an endangered species on the Isle of Man in terms of government. So we need to harness some of that new energy. So one of my ideas would be to have a deputy minister who would be brought in to do a particular job. And I think in terms of housing, I agree with Alfie, you need somebody to take responsibility for that, but actually to link that to planning and reform as well, because they're intimately entwined. We need that deputy minister to be actually be able to develop the skills so that when we have a reshuffle they can go into being a minister. So they would answer the questions, they would lead that agenda and hopefully take things forward.
Okay, thank you. Next question, please.
Next question is at the back here, Stephen Moore.
Right, put the microphone open. And Stephen, if you don't get the full answer, as always, feel free to come back at the end. Okay?
Thank you. I'd like to speak about probably an unpopular subject for many because we're quite a right-wing island. However, what I'd like to speak about is something that's not been spoken about in all the hustings, and that is civil liberties. And during the pandemic, the reaction and the laws that were passed by Tim Wold and the House of Keys filled me with dread and disgust, and I was completely unhappy with it. The Council for Europe advised all member states to only use imprisonment as an extremely last resort for minor breaches of COVID regulations. And yet here on the island, where we are a very law-abiding island, we introduced the most draconian legislation to control the pandemic. I have to ask why. The second point I'd like to make is that we imprison people, young and old, who quite frankly shouldn't have been in prison. We gave young people prison sentences which will go with them for life, and other people. A senior lawyer on the island said a few weeks ago in the paper that the police were acted heavy-handed in these regulations, but it wasn't the police who were at fault or responsible, it was you people in the House of Keys who allowed this legislation to go forward, largely without question. I think Chris Thomas did ask some questions, and I know Kate Beecroft did raise serious concerns about it. So, and I know there's other agencies now who want to have ID being shown or filled in regularly on some modes of transport to and from the island in the common travel area. So what I'd like to ask the two candidates is, which one of you, or what your ideas are to protect our civil liberties and say no to some of these agencies when they're trying to introduce and have draconian legislation on the island when there's no need for it really. Fines would have been better. Fines were introduced as a last resort. They should have been first. So I'm not very happy with how we perceived ourselves in that period of time. I was very, very saddened with our House of Keys.
Okay, Stephen, thanks so much indeed. Alex, you first.
Yeah, I'm sorry you are unhappy, and nobody wanted to be in this situation. When we hit the beginning of the COVID crisis, the only legislation we had available to us to do some of the things we needed to do was the Emergency Powers Act of 1935, I think. It's the first time it's ever been used, and it was, in some ways, yes, it was a hammer to crack a nut. And some of the decisions and some of the arrangements that were done at that time, in retrospect, were heavy-handed. I don't necessarily agree with you about the police being heavy-handed in terms of enforcement with it, but this was something that we monitored really quite carefully at the Council of Ministers. But again, you need to look back at that time. There was a huge amount of fear and unknown, and so we had to react very quickly. And as you say, that then evolved and was changed to bring in things like fixed penalties rather than imprisonment. But at the time, we had to have legislation that allowed us to bring in some quite draconian measures, such as an all-island speed limit for the first time, such as making people actually having to stay at home, a whole range of things, whilst we tried to eradicate the virus on our island. But moving forwards, we've developed since then public health legislation, which is far more nuanced, far more democratic and far more flexible. I also think, from my own point of view, that some of the coercion that's being used by other jurisdictions, both in terms of vaccination, in terms of proof that you don't have COVID, whether that be vaccine passports or enforced testing, is not what we need on the Isle of Man. I personally would oppose any ideas, as they have done in the United Kingdom, to force healthcare workers to have a COVID vaccine, and if they don't, they're not able to work. I also do not think that forcing people to show identification that they've had the vaccine or negative tests if they're going into a bar or a nightclub or cinema or public place is the right way forward. That is far too heavy-handed at this stage. But you talk about borders, and for many years we have been concerned about porous and open borders on our island, and the ability for people to come here without being on anyone's radar because of our lack of the ability to extradite people or enforce warrants from other jurisdictions. I think now is the opportunity to have that democratic debate about what sort of border security we want going forward. We may not want any. We may want to go just straight back to the time when you can get on the steam packet, give them 25 quid, get a one-way ticket, and nobody knows who you are or where you come from or where you're going to go. We may want that. However, we may want something slightly different to reinforce the security we have on our island. And that is a debate I'd like the next administration to take forward.
Okay. Enough?
Yeah. I think, first of all, it is a government's responsibility to act in these circumstances and to act when national security, when public security is threatened, and in this case, the health of our nation was substantially threatened in March 2020. And for many of us, we didn't actually know what we were really facing and truly facing. You know, what we were faced with, what we could see on our television screens was body bags being lifted out of nursing homes across the European continent. We could see hospitals jam-packed to the rafters with people on ventilating machines, and we could see a rising and steady body count mounting up across the world where this COVID disease had taken effect. So first and foremost, it is absolutely right. I believe the actions that the government took to defend our island and to close our borders were the right actions substantially. It is easy with hindsight to look back and be critical of some of those actions. Nevertheless, I do think there are areas for learning going forward, and that some of the actions that were undertaken, with hindsight and on reflection, were probably not correct. But the ethos and intent of the government during all this was to protect people and protect people's lives and your family's lives, and that was the underpinning principle behind everything that was being delivered. I hope we learn some of the lessons from this, Stephen, because there were occasions when one felt that what was actually happening on the ground in terms of interpretation of the policy and the policy that was being set was not actually justice, potentially, and perhaps was an overreaction as we started to learn more about that threat. And indeed, you will see that as time went on, we started to relax. But I hope that the government will take a learning lesson from it. We'll learn for the next time that we have a pandemic of this sort of scale. We'll be prepared to act with empathy. And I think also it's not just about the Tynwald on the just government on these occasions. It's also very much about Tynwald as well. And I think part of some of the frustrations that have grown over the last 18 months with the Council of Ministers have been about the way that we've communicated and formulated policy, and that's why there is a call now and a need for a future Council of Ministers, for a future Chief Minister to be braver about putting policy formation and debate, particularly on critical issues, onto the floor of Tynwald, and using your representatives more broadly to help design and develop resolutions to some of these critical issues.
Stephen, all right? Happy? Not happy?
Well,
go Harold, next to the
I
microphone.
don't need the mic, thank you.
No, you need it because we can't.
Just to reply, everybody can hear me.
Okay.
You haven't addressed really the fundamental point that I made, that we were an outlier from all the other jurisdictions. That's point one. I'm a little bit, I'm 50-50 whether I've got any faith in you for protecting my civil liberties, so I take great comfort that we are signatories to the Human Rights Act. That gives me great comfort, and I do think that we are in the common travel area. It's not a requirement to show ID when we travel, and as far as I'm concerned, I would speak all the time to protect that right. I believe that for law-abiding citizens, it's not the case that you've nothing to hide, then you've nothing and you can go and show your ID. It's a case of, if you're a law-abiding citizen, you do not have to show your ID within the common travel area. Thank you.
You both were in Coman, you both were obviously seeing what was going on, so did you both agree with the heavy-handed approach, or was there concern in there? From either of you?
Well, I think you know, irrespective of what you're talking about, Paul, in terms of the specifics of this case or in any other time when the Council of Ministers comes to debate its policy and its actions, there will always be times when there are split opinions and different opinions within the council. Okay. And when it comes to big issues, very big national issues like this, you either accept your collective responsibility, which sometimes you do with a heavy heart, but nevertheless still determine that is the collective will and that must be enacted, or you resign. Okay. And that is the simple decisions when it comes to these significant matters of national importance.
Right.
In answer to your question, yes, there were some quite serious disagreements, because what we were doing, we'd never done before. We'd never closed the borders. We'd never made people stay indoors. Back in March last year, we didn't even know if we asked people to put a mask on whether they would or not. I mean, this was uncharted territory. So were there disagreements around Coman? Yes. Did we thresh out those disagreements and then collectively agree on a policy and try to stick with it and then constantly review it and refine it? Yes. But there were disagreements because none of us wanted to take the measures we had to. But at the time, as Alpha said, the situation was bleak. And in terms of being an outlier, yes, we did things completely different on the Isle of Man, because we looked at what was happening across with some of the policies. We extrapolated that to our island. We knew that we were isolated, that the links we had, for instance, flying people over for ITU beds in the UK, that was now stopped for us, and we knew we had finite resources and needed to preserve them here.
Okay. Next question, please. Oh, lots of hands.
Right,
this is great.
that's good. In my head, I've got 3 people I'm going to ask the next 3 questions of. So
take the microphone over.
Okay, I'll try and remember it all. Paul Corning, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah.
Okay, just wait for the mic so we can all hear. And who's going first? That's one you go first.
Thank you. We've spoken already about development before of housing. We've seen a lot of development on greenfield sites of low density housing, and we have not seen as much development in village and town centers of brownfield sites, presumably because they are less profitable to develop. This has created all kinds of problems for transport, for our infrastructure, the services like utilities, and also for climate change mitigation. Because if you need to travel, it's much. There's an increased need for travel, and public transport is much less efficient if it is spread out. How would you encourage a shift to more urban development? And when is the Manx Development Corporation going to play a more active role?
Okay, you first. All right.
I'm happy with that. The Manx Development Corporation we set up last year as part of our economic recovery programme. First of all, I can tell you that I'm hugely enthused with the makeup of that corporation, and I very much expect that they will imminently now be coming forward with plans. I hope to bring forward affordable housing units on the old Nobles Hospital site, the old nursing home site up there, so that the progress is being made, and that they are working with the Treasury to identify strategically what other sites government has that can be brought forward to develop. And it doesn't just have to. The great thing about Manx Development Corporation is they're set up in such a way so that either they can work with government to undertake and deliver using third parties, or indeed we could work with the private sector to deliver on some of our brownfield sites and regenerate them, but also bring housing and affordable housing forward on these brownfield sites. In terms of the other matters that you're discussing, how else can we encourage the private sector? I mean, regenerating some of our sites in towns, both in Douglas, across the island, in the north, in Ramsey, are absolutely vital if we're going to move forward. I think that we should be considering, as part of the housing brief, how this can be further enhanced. There are ways that potentially government can encourage developers onto these sites. We could look at some sort of tax breaks for them to be able to bring more profitability out of the brownfield sites. We know that then they're reluctant to build housing on it, often because some of these sites require specialist treatment, or they're very, very difficult to develop out. And of course, from a government perspective, we too could potentially play a more active role in terms of assessing what our need is as a nation for some of our frontline staff. Because at the moment, with the housing crisis, we're going to really struggle to bring teachers and nurses to this island. So there may well be a need for us to play a more proactive role in terms of developing out some of these requirements and to get, a business plan in place which we can recover our investment through the rental income we can get when we bring nurses and teachers and frontline staff to the island. So I think there's a whole, again, an holistic need for this to be delivered by a new housing board stroke minister, where we can start bringing to the fore the types of policies we need to deliver the solutions that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the other aspects to that, obviously, as I've said, is a planning reform. So Mary Portis did a very good report over a decade ago now about urban regeneration, and one of her ideas was empty office space above shops, change that into residential accommodation for people, so people were living in the cities as well as working there, and therefore you cut down on all the things you've said in terms of climate change and travelling. What we have now is because of the shifts over the last 18 months, is probably a surplus of office space. We have more people working from home, more people hot desking. So we need to imaginatively look at repurposing that space for residential accommodation right in the centre of town. We need to get around some of the planning restrictions in terms of having to have X number of car spaces there. If you live in the centre of town and you've got a bike, why should you have to have a car parking space to actually only have in a flat? So there's these imaginative ideas that we can bring in, but if we can try to make sure that the government is flexible enough and responsive enough to new ideas, then I think we'll get there.
All right. Got another question. We'll move on because we've got so many questions, haven't we?
Yes, move on, I think. Paul Weddle.
Canon, in your opening remarks, you mentioned a future programme for government for the coming administration should have clear policy objectives and set key targets. I'd like to ask each of you what would be your top three, two or three key targets that you'd like to be judged by in 5 years' time.
Okay, Alex first.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the programme of government back in 2016, I was part of, and we were all part of doing, started out as a very good idea. I think it became overly complicated, overly cumbersome. It was quite hard even for politicians who've been part of the genesis of it to remember all the KPIs and everything. And certainly, I'm sure, hard for the public, particularly when you then followed it through the next 5 years. So I think the first thing we need to do is have a much simpler programme for government or government plan that's in our Canon's manifesto, so that you actually have the definite outcomes you want to achieve. And some of those we've already talked about. There access to affordable housing. How do we judge what's affordable? Do we do that in terms of earnings? How do we assess that? And then how do we make sure that we review that on a regular basis to make sure that we're delivering on that? We also need to tackle poverty, looking at average earnings. We also need to look at a whole range of other things in terms of climate change. We've got the plan there already, but we need to invigorate achieving that to make sure that we're spending the right budget, make sure that we're hitting targets, and make sure that we're aiming for the more ambitious target as well. In terms of education, we need to look at outcomes for people and also the access to preschool education as well, and preschool places. And also, predominantly, we need to look at the workforce to make sure that people are getting the right wage. So one of the aspects from the recent Tynwald Poverty Committee was a commitment that was agreed by the Council of Ministers to transition so that the minimum wage met the living wage. We also need to make sure that income support and a range of other benefits are linked also to the cost of living, rather than increased arbitrarily according to how much money is available from Treasury. So there's a whole raft of things there, but at the end of the day, the priorities have to be developed by members of Tynwald and actually communicated very clearly to the public, and then we need the regular review to make sure that they're implemented and achieved.
Okay. Paul?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Paul, good to see you again after a couple of weeks. Of course, Tynwald will really set the island plan in terms of approving the detail of the policies within that. But I have set out to determine, both in what I've said today, but throughout the last week or so, to deliver what I believe and highlight what I believe are the key priorities. And first and foremost for me will be the economy of this island, and making sure that we have a robust and sustainable economy, but also that we've grown the economy over the next 5 years. And I repeat what I said, without a robust economy, without an economy that's growing, without an economy that's offering opportunities for people on this island, both young and old, and without the drive of those, particularly in the private sector, to push forward, then we're just simply not going to have the financial muscle that we need to deliver on all the other aspects that we want to deliver on. So that will be indicators of where I would like to see in terms of shaping the next island plan. And then also climate change, and I have put that down as one of the key priorities, but also I'm looking for the next council to agree a pragmatic island plan to deliver on our climate change objectives, and I would like to see a roadmap attached to that really tries to outline the high level costings and how we're going to get there. But I would like to see that delivered within the next 12 months so that we can actually set out and start delivering in a visible and transparent way in terms of those commitments, and also alongside that, where the other benefits are going to come from our economic progress, such as solar panels and the investment and skills that are going to be needed within our construction industry to deliver on upgrading our housing stock. And then finally, the other two critical areas for me are going to be healthcare and education, and attached to that particularly, I would like to see us in a much better place in 5 years' time. I certainly want to get rid of these waiting lists. I'm sure that the new Council of Ministers and a new House of Keys in Tynwald is going to be one of their key priorities, is going to be tackling this extended waiting list so we can deliver better healthcare and give Manx care a chance to breathe. And finally, on education, I'd like to carry on with some of the work that's been brought forward by the Economic Recovery Group, the range of training courses. We set out 1,000 new training courses in 12 months, that kind of speed of delivery, branching out across society to give people the best opportunities, reach out to training, enhance both skills, but also give people opportunities will also be vital.
Lots there. I'm sure we'll come back to one or two of those subjects and other questions in more detail, hopefully. Okay, Roger, next.
Alan Cope. Good evening. I'm sure you will both agree that as Chief Minister, you will be responsible for your various departments. At the present time, the various departments are laws unto themselves. They put down their own laws, they don't communicate with each other, and I'll give you two examples. Take planning, for example, first. You're both interested in climate change and believe that floods will be coming. In Ramsey there is a flood protection scheme going forward around the harbour, and yet planning has been applied for on floodland. It's denoted as a floodplain. Now, floodplains in earlier years, to my knowledge, were there to take surplus water and distribute it. If you fill it up with concrete, the water can't go anywhere. That won't help climate change at all. Personally, I think that should be outlawed, that no building will be allowed on floodplains, brownfield sites and different matter.
Also with planning, I believe the law in the Isle of Man states that if there are no fences between boundaries of just a mound, the legal boundary is the top of the centre of the mound. Now I personally have a case going on at the moment where a person in Clebain Drive has extended her fence over a metre into my land. I only heard about it.
Maybe we should get too micro on this one, if you don't mind. Just keep. There's lots going in that question. Is that all right? I'm getting down to just a personal issue. Is that all right? That's the general answer to what you're saying. I mean, you were saying the rogue, all the different departments a bit sort of doing their own thing, wasn't it? And then you got into planning. So there's two sort of things in there. Yeah.
No. The planners, the next door neighbour said to me, the person has got planning permission and gave me the number. When I phoned up the planning department, I said, how come I wasn't notified when somebody puts a fence on my land? The answer was, civil matter, contact a lawyer.
Right.
And that's all I could get out of it.
Yeah.
Now on the second point is on the two. The second point is the two departments with the registry office in government for limited companies and the Attorney General's office who deal with charities. Now, years ago when Eddie Tear was Treasurer Minister, I wrote to this Tear and said, why don't you use a copy of the Form 9 when you have a change of director for the company to be delivered to the company's registry who want the same information under Schedule 3 but in a different format? And to his credit, Mr. Tear put, and it was on the government website, highlighted in yellow, that the Form 9 in company's registry can be used for the charities registry.
What's the point? What's the question?
The point is that a few months ago, when I sent a copy to the Attorney General's for a registered charity, it was refused because the email address and the telephone number wasn't on.
Okay, that's quite a lot to get there.
First of all, I mean, you know, it is vital that government listens to these issues and does react. But can I just pick up on the ethos of your first point about the Chief Minister's relationship with his ministers? Well, the Chief Minister does not have actually the ability to tell ministers what to do. Ministers have a legal power of their own, and they are the department. The only way that a Chief Minister can instruct a minister is by if there is a problem and they wish to direct a minister to undertake a policy, is by Council of Ministers vote. So we do have effectively what you might call safeguards built into the political system, whereby ministers are given responsibility for departments. But the critical thing is, and this is where it does go wrong on a number of occasions and has gone wrong, is that ministers have either just been left to get on with things when departments have been failing or when projects have been failing, or and other members of council have failed to potentially grasp the initiative, or the Chief Minister has failed to grasp the initiative. I do think that some of these issues need to be ironed out. The Chief Minister, of course, has the power to hire and fire ministers, so he does have that ultimate sanction in that respect. But I think we do need to make a real effort now with collective political will to improve our coordination across government. I think this can be enhanced by using a policy and strategy unit in the centre of government with the collective will from everybody around the council table, but also I hope with the collective will from those who are in outlying boards and other government departments to work together with a supported island plan to deliver on the policy, but also to be accountable to that unit and be accountable to the Chief Minister in terms of how things are going, and also be willing to work together to shape changes in direction. I also think that this can be enhanced by, as I said in my outline speech, by ministers coming to Tynwald, alongside the usual scrutiny, but coming to Tynwald at least annually with their progress reports for their departments and allowing a public scrutiny process to take place on the major issues of the day and their performance. So there is a lot of work to be done. And you know, when you get down to the type of nitty-gritty issues that you're talking about, you know, government has also got to have a can-do attitude. Too often, I think people are coming to the government, they're explaining their experiences, and they're not being listened to properly. So, you know, partly that is a real culture issue that needs to change within government. It's something that I think can be driven from the top.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a number of points there. Just talking about intergovernmentally working, I think it's far more important to make sure that you share resources, share budgets for that outcome. So if there's things like we're talking about housing, poverty, it's not just one department, that encompasses a whole range of departments. So we need to pool those resources, look at the way the various combing committees work to make sure that they've got the backing there. In terms of planning, there's been quite a lot of work done by this team in terms of the first possession and some of the inadequacies of the current system, whereby people can do land grabs, and as long as there's not a line on the map, they can succeed. You're also talking about a lack of planning enforcement. That's something that you know, has been raised with DEFRA on several occasions to get the right resources there, so people can respond while building is going ahead, rather than wait far too late and just let them do it retrospectively. And also in terms of resourcing, in terms of protecting our national heritage, there is a secret list of buildings that should be listed but aren't listed until they're bought and they're started to be redeveloped, and then they're listed as historical. That's bonkers. I mean, on an island with our history, we should have the resources to say what needs to be saved and what can be redeveloped, rather than use this arbitrary system with a secret list, which nobody will publish in case it's acted upon. So there's a whole range of things there which I think we need to put the resources in to make the planning process fit for purpose.
I'm conscious that it's 22 already. How many people got questions? Just raise. Oh my! We have to go faster, won't we? We will have to whiz around. Okay, is he ready? Next question. Yeah, please.
Yes, John Shepherd has been waiting since about 7 o'clock to ask this question.
Can I ask everyone to be succinct? That's all about, because it's about 10 people.
It's about carers, I believe.
Yeah.
That's right.
Succinct, please.
Gentlemen, as you know, family carers in the Isle of Man save the government millions of pounds every year by what they do. I've been campaigning for improvements in the way that family care is managed in the island for over 20 years, and yet up until Manx Care was established, all I've seen is what little was being given to family care is being taken away. Happily, since Manx Care came in, I've had more positive response from Manx Care in a matter of weeks that I've been talking to them this year than I've ever had in 20 years from the department. I mean, during that time, I've been involved not just looking at all aspects of family care, including housing. And as you know, we've recently completed a pair of passive houses which effectively are specifically aimed at...
Sorry, the question is only because...
Yeah, but that's it. But if I'm yes, I'll get that.
Yeah.
The point is that the way forward, if the government wishes to maintain family care as a viable option in the Isle of Man, family carers need to be established as professionals in their own right, because at the moment they're treated with disrespect on a grand scale by the department, and effectively you cannot. I mean, I would challenge anybody in this room to try and to do a minimum of 35 hours a week and live on £123.05 a week. It's impossible. We have to subsidise that, you know, our that care, and we provide over 100 hours a week to our family members.
So you want paying for it? You want the government taking
thousands of pounds.
So what's the question? You get statements.
The question is, you know, I think it's critically important that this next government effectively examines the role of family carers in the Isle of Man, basically establishes them as with respectful professional status, and effectively on the basis of that starts to reward them with a living wage, what that will do, it will encourage young people, because at the moment we're all...
Okay, well, let's let them answer,
Yeah,
because it's more of a statement than a question. I keep thinking,
Well,
what is it? Yeah,
No.
that's right.
I mean, if I could first thank you, because that sort of feedback about Manx Care is really important, because Manx Care is a work in progress, and it's there as the delivery arm of government policy. So it's good to hear that you've been getting that support. I think you make a very valid point about informal carers. Informal, no, they're not. They're doing the work, but it's the way they're treated by the state and supported by the state, and that brings in the way we deal with things like respite care. It also deals with the way we work with the third sector to make sure they can support carers as well. So some of the excellent charities we've got here, like Crossroads Care, provide that care to those families who don't necessarily have a family member who can do it. So I think there is that need as we move forward with Manx Care, as we look at how we provide social care and how we fund it, to actually recognise the input that families, friends and relatives put into supporting people in the community.
Okay, Al.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it brief because there's not much I can disagree with Alex, but I am pleased to hear that Manx Care have started to take this issue seriously. We all want to ensure that the care in the community is properly thought out and developed. I think there are things that we can do. We definitely need to look at what we are paying carers and how we are supporting them from our welfare system. And also one of the other critical issues that I can see from my own constituency experience is that there are too many carers being left to carry the burden without some proper respite care being available to them. And I would feel passionately that that's also a critical issue, that respite care, and I very much hope the next government will be seeking to push Manx Care to deliver better outcomes when it comes to that area.
All right, next question.
Carla.
Hi, I'd just like a quick response to 4 questions. 1, are you going to follow the UK and fluoride water? 2, what is the best treatment the Isle of Man offers COVID patients? 3, where do you stand with the public and cannabis, access to cannabis? And 4 is for Dr. Alex. 9 other MHKs received more votes than you, and you lost about 50% of the votes from your last election. So how does that make you feel, and do you think you're still the best candidate for the role, considering losing so many votes?
Okay, well, Al's kicking off this one.
Sorry,
So
what was the 4th question?
all about him. All about him.
Oh, sorry, that was it. Sorry.
It was a person.
Should I be here?
Okay, right, well I won't try and answer that one. Fluoridisation of water, I can't really comment because I just don't know enough about our future policies in that regard. Best treatments for COVID, absolutely will need to be looking at the medical advice and listening to what the professionals have to say. And in terms of cannabis, which I know has been a big discussion point, my view is that we've set out a framework now, we've set out the legislation, we've got a regulator in place to take medicinal cannabis forward on this island in terms of our people being allowed to grow medicinal cannabis and for it to be then utilised for medicinal purposes. I'd be happy to see that legislation develop further so that there was proper access on the island to medicinal cannabis. And my commitment when I was asked this question about cannabis to my constituents was that I'd be prepared, if appropriate, to have an open and mature debate about the future of cannabis on the island, but it's not a priority in terms of the manifesto commitments in terms of shaping the island that I see at the moment.
Okay, well, medical questions in a sense.
So we'll go for it. So fluoridisation of water, we had that debate, we had the public consultation. There wasn't a huge amount of support for it in terms of what was seen as mass medicalisation. So unless somebody wants to bring that up again, I think that's a bit dead in the water, so to speak. However, we do need to deal with really poor oral health amongst our children, and there are whole ways of dealing with that, including fluoride if necessary, but use locally, emphasis on fluoride toothpaste and things like that. In terms of the second one, which was treatments for COVID, I know that at Nobles, the therapeutic committee there look at all the research. They had remdesivir when they needed it. They will have those in stock and hopefully available, but they follow very much the UK guidelines on those. In terms of cannabis, yes, Although, I mean, the progress on this has been so painfully slow, it's hardly moved at all. Yes, we do have an industry here, but we don't have local people having access to medicinal cannabis, full stop, after 5 years of talking about it. And after several consultations which showed overwhelming public support for it, we also don't have an agenda for the legalisation of cannabis, or at least decriminalising it and putting it down from Class B to C. And in my manifesto I've said that actually I do think that is a bit of a priority because of the Chief Constable's report, who pointed out that drug crime was a major lead in terms of violent crime as well, and that we were criminalising large numbers of people. Should I be here? I got a right kicking at the last election. You're quite right. I'm from 2,900 and topping the poll, I went down to 1,400. I think there was a whole range of reasons for that. I haven't done the full analysis because I haven't gone round to talk to the 1,500 people who didn't vote for me, why they didn't do that. Should I be here? Yes, actually, for two reasons. I got a mandate from the people of Ramsey to represent them, and two, I don't think any Chief Minister should get a free ride without a decent election. So yes, I am here. I am contesting the seat with Alfred Cannon because I think that's a healthy part of democracy. I don't think anyone should just walk into a position like that without having an alternative. I'm just sorry there's only two of us at this table tonight.
Just about the candidacy, you put it in your actual manifesto, but you don't know until you've got a new Coleman if you're going to be able to take that through, do you? I mean, that's just your thought, right? You can't make people go with you if they don't want to.
No, it's a statement of intent, and you know, whilst we can talk about manifestos, so election manifestos can promise the world. In terms of the Chief Minister statement or manifesto, you can't promise anything because you have to create that team, you have to bring people along with you to achieve that outcome. But I think it's still important to state what I think the next administration should do. And overall drug reform is a key part of that.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Next, thank you.
Andy assures me that it's going to be a very short question.
So I'm on to it now.
A really quick question. Both candidates have mentioned opportunity, and thank you for that. That's reassuring. I think it's fair to say that one of the constituencies on the island that's been hit really hard during COVID have been school children. What are the opportunity areas, and if I could just ask for 3 bullet points perhaps from each candidate, what are the opportunity areas to drive up educational standards on the island? If we take another island jurisdiction, Singapore for instance, they are world class. What steps would you as a Chief Minister in relation to education implement to drive up those standards?
Okay, we'll start with the Education Minister as such for another day.
Right, so a brief answer to that is going to be difficult. I think we have to accept that there's been underinvestment in the education service on the Isle of Man, full stop. And that's not, that's not just bricks and mortar, it's teachers assistants. We have class sizes that are too large. I mean, you compare us with Singapore, they're far too large. We have teaching systems that haven't been developed and teachers that haven't been supported to develop their skills properly, so there's that. We also, whilst we were really leading the way a decade ago in terms of the use of new technologies in schools, that's waned as well. And also we haven't really done some of the key work we need to do in terms of assessment of young people and children, particularly when they come into schools. One of the big impetuses has to be dealing with adverse childhood experiences, doing prompt interventions relatively early on to find those young people and children who are struggling at school by having some sort of testing, particularly in terms of literacy and numeracy, to look at those kids who may have dyslexia and dyscalculia early on, put then the resources in terms of additional educational needs so that they can achieve their full potential. So it comes down to investment not just in people and processes, but also in those children themselves.
Well, I think there's as you asked for 3 critical issues. I support the fact that we do need to do a funding review to make sure that we actually have got the resources available for our teachers to deliver. I think the second thing is we need to empower our schools to create and deliver the culture and the environment for our children to flourish, and we need to do that by removing some of the central bureaucracy that has dogged us over the last few years and caused tremendous antagonism between central government, if you like, and our teachers. We need to trust them to deliver. But the third thing that I would like a new education minister to really explore is the transparency and reassurance for us all around the quality levels and give us all quality assurance that our schools are delivering. And I'd also like to know more about how our children are performing against other jurisdictions, and also where we are in terms of the skills base that's been developed, not just the skills base, but also using a quality assurance scheme to see if that is an area that at least we're delivering in terms of standards, but also what we're doing culturally to enhance a broader range of skills amongst our children. So those are the three critical issues for me.
Thank you. Roving Mike, on you go. Yes? Sit down.
Is Alex not answering that one?
Done?
Oh,
First.
good. Okay.
Glad you're paying attention.
Two short ones from the back.
Lovely. Oh yes. Here we go.
Damien Chiapelli.
Right.
Good evening, gentlemen. Two quick questions. The first is, do the candidates champion there should be a single legal entity for the Isle of Man government? If so, over what period would they implement it? If not, why not? The second question is, many of the plans that have been discussed this evening involve spending money, and in order to generate that revenue, of course, you've talked about growing the economy. I would ask the candidates, what key priority, what key concrete priority would they implement in order to grow the economy? Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Al first.
Right, well, there are, first of all, with regards to the single legal entity, and one of the things that I need to think that the next Council of Ministers and the government needs to move away from very, very quickly is endless discussions about the shape of Tynwald and the shape of government. There has to be a refreshed and renewed political will to deliver, and I think that is what a Chief Minister needs to draw out. He needs to draw out that collective political will, draw out the right policies, and get on with delivery. Now is not the time for us to be drawn and sidetracked with such big issues facing the island, both in the immediate future with gas prices, potentially inflationary pressures, potentially food shortages over the winter period. So we've really got to have a government that is not distracted and that is focused on delivery, and harnessing that collective political will be key. And I think that it will be really for Tynwald. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have these debates, but the focus of the government should be on delivering and harness the collective political will, and that will be my priority. And then in terms of the economy, I've said constantly, and I demonstrated in 2016 that the reaction to tightening financial pressures was not to deliver austerity budgets, but was to deliver responsible budgets, but also to make some brave decisions within those budgets and to continue to put people first. And when I say we took some brave decisions, the first budget that I delivered gave probably the single biggest rise in personal allowances. We put a £2,000 rise in the personal allowances in a real effort to start putting money back into people's pockets. And of course, by doing that, we increased their spending power, and we did that in the face of quite heavy opposition at the time from the civil service, because they felt that we needed to keep a very, very tight and close and safety first rein on our budgets. But by challenging back, by doing that, we actually created an economy by putting people first, giving them the spending power to uplift the economy and create the jobs and the economic success that we've had. So I would suggest that we do not retrench, although I advocate responsible budgeting for the future.
Right, so single legal entity. Chris Rocketshaw isn't in the room. It's a nice idea. Is it a panacea for all the ills of government? Probably not. Is it an idea worth exploring and developing? Absolutely. How do you do that? You actually look at the long-term consequences in terms of whether it improves outcomes, and then bring it in over the course of the next administration. But I think it's just the start of a sea change in how government works. In terms of growing the economy, I can't tell you that, and I shouldn't tell you that. We've got the KPMG report, which hopefully will be due later on this year, who have spent a huge amount of time talking to a huge range of people across this island, who hopefully will come forward with a report which Tynwald could then discuss to lead the way forward in terms of economic strategy, and which sectors, and there will be many different sectors, we need to prioritise for support and allow to develop.
Thank you very much indeed. Next question.
From the left.
We're going at a good pace. I don't know how long we can go. What's our cut-off time? We okay? Yeah. Oh, right, okay, then. That's good. We can get more in.
5 in the morning.
Yeah.
Good evening. Over the last 5 years, it's very easy to count the number of failures and the successes.
Oh, your microphone's stopped. Do you want to come here closer or something?
It's very easy to count the number of failures higher than the number of successes. We've heard a lot during the election process about the word accountability. How will you hold senior civil servants to account, stop them wasting our money?
I knew that would get a big... That's a hot one.
My turn.
Yeah.
Yeah, how? Somebody who's parachuted into education to try to sort it out. It's not easy. I think we do need to look at the way the civil service is structured. We do need to look at the way appraisals are organised to make sure that they're open and transparent and done on a regular basis. And also we need to explore the way that civil service contracts are created so that they're not endless and indefinite until retirement, that we have some degree of control about who stays in which department for how long. So whether that's fixed term or, as Julie Edge has in one of her motions, whether that's performance-related pay, you need some sort of way that you can judge civil servants for their delivery of the policies and strategies that are determined by Tim Moulton and then implemented by the minister involved. But it's not straightforward, and unfortunately at the moment the only way of changing a chief executive seems to be to sack them, and that's not good for that person themselves because they may have the wrong skill set for the job anyway. We need that professional development of the civil service to actually make it as professional and good as possible to serve the people of this island.
Well, we do need to get to grips with some of these critical issues, particularly around our infrastructure expenditure. First and foremost, we have to deliver a targeted island plan. The last time that we came together 5 years ago, I think the programme that we put together was far too big, far too expansive, and really almost impossible, I think, to control in many respects, and probably led in so many elements to bigger government. I think secondly, we need the political will to work across government. That's what I've said about the policy and strategy unit, and I think that government needs to be ready to challenge itself in these areas. The other element that really does strike me in all this is that very often we find the over expenditure or the failure to deliver it should have been identified at a very early stage. So the strategy and the planning that goes around this is just not acceptable, I believe, anymore. Just to have that determined by the politicians alone. I've suggested that we should use much more skills and experience from within our community to oversee these types of projects and to challenge the civil service. I think that we can set out the right framework in an open and transparent manner to bring skills, to sit alongside politicians and to advise them, and that many of those skills are existent. I know there are many skilled engineers, for example, with FTSE 100 experience. There are many skilled lawyers and accountants, for example, who could sit alongside at certain times and in the right environment to challenge back and to make sure that there is robust advice being given to ministers, particularly in these areas. I've already highlighted, for example, that we need to change the way we are doing our infrastructure in terms of having a major projects unit, and the board of that major projects unit should be drawn by skilled expertise from outside government, so that we have got that challenge and platform to give us much more confidence that what we're being told in terms of the costings and in terms of the way that projects are going to be delivered are realistic and achievable.
Right, round of applause now. I need to come in here quickly. DOI, you want to break it up. I don't know what your thoughts are, I will ask you, but you're pretty certain you want to break up DOI, right? And a big shake-up at top level. Am I reading that right?
Well, of course, again, this is not an autocracy, and my view is that the DOI now should be made more accountable and transparent, and that it is too big and unwieldy. I've already given the commitment that I believe will be supported in terms of pulling out housing and communities and housing local government out from the DOI.
But you're going to break up DOI?
No, I think that will be for me, if elected, to determine with both Tim and also a council of ministers in terms of what structure now would be best to make sure that we are have got an accountable Department for Infrastructure, but also a targeted and focused Department for
I'm
Infrastructure.
sure you said you were going to break up DOI, but what's your view?
I was really disappointed by the Beeman's report into the DOI, which suggested yet another layer of bureaucracy to try to look after the projects being delivered. I think the DOI has been asked to do too much with too little and should be broken down to a degree into operational units such as highways, such as transport, and actually given the right funding to provide those services to the
More
people.
ministries or just moved around?
Just moved around.
Okay.
The point is, though, Paul, things need to change. If you're not going to have a council that is willing to change the way that we're delivering in terms of the structure in some of these vital areas, then you run the risk that you're just going to get the same old, and the public are going to lose confidence. So there must be a willingness to want to change, and there must be a willingness to want to challenge. And I've highlighted tonight some of the ways that this can be done.
Where's our microphone?
The final question.
Final question?
From the centre of the room. Sorry, I don't know your name.
Wow.
My name is Mark Leeter. On October the 20th, on October 2020 last year and May 2021 this year, the Constitutional and Legal Affairs and Justice Committee published two wide-ranging and damning reports into both legal services on the Isle of Man and adverse possession legislation. What would you do to ensure that, unlike the Clothier report into legal services from May 1990, which is 30 years ago, the Calcott report into the regulatory and disciplinary procedures of Manx law practitioners approved 20 years ago, and a select committee examination into civil legal proceedings, which now nearly 10 years old, all of these which were largely swept into the long grass, that the carefully considered recommendations of this recent committee will not suffer a similarly disappointing fate.
Thank you very much for pointing those out, because they were really good bits of work, and we've got one of the authors in the audience. The creation of a Justice Minister, okay, it's part of Home Affairs as well, Justice and Home Affairs, I think is essential for leading these and actually developing the ideas and the recommendations of those reports and bring them into play. Both reports were debated in Tynwald, they were approved. Some of the recommendations were slightly amended, particularly in terms of the status of the Law Society. But those need to be implemented, and then we need another review in a few years' time to make sure they're providing what people need on the Isle of Man, which is affordable and accessible legal representation.
Alf?
There are significant improvements needed in the way that justice and the legal system on this island operates. That report was thoroughly put together, contained some excellent recommendations, and we must now strive to deliver on some of those absolute key recommendations. I accept there is a lack of confidence in some quarters and in certain circumstances, particularly when people are dissatisfied with the advice and service that's been delivered from lawyers. They do not trust the system when it comes to getting arbitration and performance-related sort of arbitration in those areas, and also we have to have confidence that our legal system is reaching the standards that we see in other jurisdictions as well. So we do need to carry on taking this forward, and we do need to see this being highlighted again by our government, taking this very seriously, and justice being part of the agenda, whether that's in the Home Office or again is being delivered by a minister in a different capacity.
I've got a question, I can't help myself. You both talk very third party about what happened over the last 5 years, yet you've both been inside that tent. You surely could have done more yourselves rather than keep saying the next administration. It worries me, it worries people when you hear this, that you have been there, but why haven't you done more to solve these problems?
Okay. Shall I start off with that one? Because we have consensus politics on the Isle of Man, and that has to involve give and take, because the vast majority of us are independent. And also, when you're invited into Comyn, you have to sacrifice some things, you have to draw some red lines and be prepared to leave Comyn if those lines are crossed. I was lucky enough that, although I got close to some of those, I didn't have to leave. But again, it is a matter of give and take. It is a matter of the collective will if we're going to have effective government. Not Alf and I agreed with some things, we disagreed with others. We disagreed with Conan, and sometimes we agreed with the majority of the time. But if you're going to have effective government, you need to drive policies forward and constantly review them. So did Conan make the wrong mistakes now and again? Possibly in hindsight, but again, we can do better, and we will do in the next administration.
Well, I think every time you come to elect a government, there will be problems and issues that next generation of politicians were going to solve. I don't think anybody has ever reached perfection from a political governance perspective, and generally there tends to be a trend that we end in glorious failure in a lot of areas. But let's also be clear. I mean, yes, there are a lot of issues that need to be sorted out. But I started out in my opening remarks by painting a picture of what things were like on this island 5 years ago, when that place was littered with for sale signs as people started to drift off the island, when austerity measures were really impacting on our quality of life. We've changed the emphasis in many of those. We came through 3 or 4 very successful years in terms of meeting our budgetary targets and growing our economy and putting people to work. There were nearly 1,000 people unemployed 5 years ago. We've got 350 unemployed now. And yes, there are many, many issues to tackle. But that's why we're all about. That's what gives me the drive to sit here in front of you, ready to go again, to bring forward new solutions to approach things in a different way, and deliver a plan for this island that really does mean proper outcomes for our people and addresses some of these critical issues.
Well, Tuesday we'll find out. That's tomorrow, isn't it? Tuesday, tomorrow. We're going to find out, maybe, but it could be more interesting, and there could be some people in this room that yet may put their name forward, who knows. I asked at the beginning about if you made your mind up, that's one thing. I'd like to see if anyone's, first of all, who was undecided, have they made their mind up now, if they had the votes? Anything tonight that's made you think, yes, I now know who I want? And is it, oh, that's interesting. Quite a few hands. And has anybody changed their thoughts on who they would have gone for, but now heard after tonight have gone for the other candidate? I'm not asking for names. Not one. So overall, you've got your same vote, but you may have gathered a few more. If only we had a chance, but we haven't. Anyway, can I thank the Positive Action Group for hosting this tonight? It's been an honour. I did it 5 years ago. It's crazy, isn't it? 5 years ago. And it's been lovely to have people turn out to watch this. And I know there's quite a few people in this room who have the votes. So I should have asked about horse trading, but that's, Have you, anybody coming up talking to you?
No? Not this time.
No horse trading.
See, there's loads more questions. Good luck.